Hello, and welcome to Conquering Finale. My name is Jason Lafredo, and this is a subscriber request. Today's request comes from Kevin Loughman, who asks about creating an ambitus or incipit, in other words, vocal ranges, at the beginning of a choir piece. There seems to be several different ways of showing these, and I believe an ambitus is where the notes go on the staff before the clef, and an incipit is where there's a whole separate bar showing the ranges before the first bar of the piece. Truthfully, I'm not sure that these terms are 100% standardized in this way, but for our purposes here, I'll go ahead and distinguish the two in this manner. I'll start by showing you how to do an ambitus and then show you the incipit, which sort of starts the same way but has some additional complexity. And there are even several different variations of both of these, so I'm going to show you what I think is probably the most common variation, and from there you should be able to apply the finale techniques you learn here to create whichever variation of the ambitus or incipit that you want. Before I get into that, I just want to show you how you can submit a request for a video. First of all, you must be a subscriber, so click the subscribe button on YouTube and/or sign up for the mailing list by clicking this link on the website. Then just send me an email with your request. Lastly, if your request makes it to video, please do your best to donate to the cause whatever you can. It would be most appreciated. More details can be found following the link in the description below or directly on the subscriber request page of my website. Now, let's get started with our ambituses, or is it ambiti? Actually, if you're curious, the plural of ambitus is actually ambitus. Thank you, Google, for that information. So let's get going here. And before we do that, I just need to give you a little bit of background. You can see in this particular piece, I do have a pickup measure, and I'm not using the traditional pickup measure in Finale where you select it from here. You can see this is actually unchecked. There's sort of a secondary way of doing a pickup measure, and when you add these ambitus measures here, it's actually easier to do this if you do not have the traditional pickup measure. So if you do it the alternative way, which is to sort of fake a pickup measure, and the way to do that, if you're curious, is in the time signature tool. This is actually a 1/4 bar, but if you choose the more options here, you'll see that I'm using a different time signature for display, and it's displaying 3/4. So that's what's going on here. That's how I'm faking this pickup measure, and you can see that the next measure is an actual 3/4 measure. The other thing I'm doing here is that you'll notice that the bar numbering starts on that first real bar, or the first full bar. So in this pickup measure, I've unchecked the include in measure numbering option in the measure attribute. So this is how you would do a fake pickup bar, and for these ambitus and incipits, this is a better way to do this. You can do it with a real pickup bar, but it's just a little bit wonkier, so I decided to do it this way. Now the first thing we're going to do to get started here is actually insert a whole new measure before this, and I'm going to choose insert measure stack here, just one measure before the fake pickup measure. Now in this particular case, it's going to add the same time signature measure that of this bar that I just inserted before, so this is actually exactly what I want. This is going to be another 1/4 measure, which is showing as 3/4. It's totally fine. If you do not have a pickup measure though, you'll have to change this to a 1/4 or 2/4 depending on how you're doing this, and also use different time signature for display. If you're in 4/4, make it 4/4. Although it doesn't quite matter because we're going to hide this time signature anyway. But if you do not have this pickup bar already, you are going to have to do something like this in this ambitus bar. Now once you have that here, you can go ahead and add your notes that you need. So I know the range of the soprano is D to D, so I'll just add that. The alto is B to B. I know that the tenor is low D to high G, which I can't quite reach, so I'll do this way. There we go. Add the G, and I know my bass is low G to high C, which I also can't reach. So there we go. Add the C there. All right, so these are the ranges that I need. They're all set to go, and then we have to start doing some stuff to make this look like an ambitus. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create a new staff style. So I'm going to choose my staff tool here. I'm going to go to Define Staff Styles. I'm going to choose New, and I'm going to call this Ambitus bar. Make it copyable, that's fine. And here's what we need to do with this Ambitus bar in the staff style. We need to uncheck clefs, key signatures, because we don't want to see any of this, and time signatures. So make sure that those boxes are empty. And the other thing we don't want to see is stems on this, so we can actually uncheck stems. So we'll just get note heads. And then finally, the last thing we're going to want to do is actually uncheck this option, display rests in empty measures, because I'm not going to have the ambitus in the piano part, so I don't want to see the rests there either. I just want to see a blank space. And that should do it. We just created the new staff style, and then I'm just going to select all of these measures and apply the staff style, Ambitus bar. There we go. So now we have the Ambitus notes, but now we need to reintroduce the time signature, clef, and key signatures in the next bar. Actually, before I do that, let me do one more thing with this first bar. There's a couple things we want to get rid of. We don't want to have a measure number showing here, and we also don't want to have the bar line. So let's do that first. Let's go to the measure attributes for that new measure, and we're going to choose the invisible bar line, and we're going to uncheck this option here, include in measure numbering. All right, so now we've just reset that so that bar 1 starts at the first full bar of music, and we don't have that bar line anymore. So now, while I'm in the measure tool, I'm going to go into the second measure, which is my pickup measure here. And I'm going to do two things in the measure attributes for this measure. Where it says key signature and you see show as needed or show if needed, we're going to actually always show. And we're going to do the same thing with the time signature, always show, and click OK. And so now we've got the clef and the key and time signature, but now we still need to put the clefs. The clefs do not exist this way in the measure attributes because clefs are a little bit more independent than the full measure stack, if that makes sense. So with the clefs, we do have to add these back one at a time, which is sort of a pain, but it's easy enough to do. So we're going to go to the clef tool, and we're going to go ahead and re-add each of these clefs. Now, if you just double click in this measure that's highlighted here, it's going to pull up the correct clef for you. So the only thing you have to do is where it says show clef, instead of when needed, we're going to choose always, and we're going to want to change this to 100%, and just make sure that yeah, this is fine. Measure 2 to next clef change. This doesn't matter in this particular case, and we'll click OK, and we'll get our clef back. We'll fix the spacing in a second, but let's go ahead and do that with all the other ones here. 100%. The tenor clef, and you can see when you double click that, it's giving you the one that it's supposed to be, so you don't really have to do much more than just these two things. Always 100%. Always 100%. We're going to have to do the same thing in the piano. Always 100%, and the left hand always 100%. All right. So now we've got we're almost there. We just have to fix the spacing up a little bit, and that's easy enough. I think I have auto music spacing turned off or something, so we'll just respace that, update layout. And we're close, except you see that there's a huge gap here. This is partially because this is considered a full measure, and measures usually have a minimum width, so we actually have to get this a lot lower than the minimum width. And what I'm going to suggest here is that you save this for last, because when you start moving these measures around systems, you can actually see the spacing of that gap change. So if we add more, that spacing is going to be a little bit less. So this is going to depend on how busy these notes are, how many measures are on this staff. So as soon as you're done, then I would come back here and do this. And there's a couple of ways we can go about this. We don't want to necessarily drag this way because you're only extending this measure. We kind of want to move all of these measures over proportionally. So the best way to do this is actually double click with the measure tool to get back to the measure attributes, and where you see display width, you're going to have to change this number, which is a relative number. I have some great information about this in the measure tool video. Maybe I'll link the video here that explains what's going on here. But basically we want to change this to a smaller value, and let's just try 3.5. Let's see what that does. Actually, that's pretty close. So yeah, so again, it's relative, so it depends on the width of all the other measures and everything. So in this particular case, 0.35 will work fairly well. We can adjust a little bit further if you want. If you want this to move a little bit centered, you can kind of click that second handle here, and then just move this handle to get these a little bit centered in that space. And there you go. Now, this is legitimately one way to do this. I've seen it where this is all it is. You don't have to do any more. There's another one where we can actually include a vertical line here. So this is fairly easy. We can go into the Smart Shape tool, choose the Line tool, and what I like to do is get in kind of close here so you can be kind of precise with this. And also, when you create lines, they kind of go all over the place in terms of the angle and everything. But what's really handy here is if you hold down the Shift key and double click and drag, you'll ensure that you'll get a completely vertical line. You can do that horizontally too, by the way. Hold down Shift and drag to the right to get a completely horizontal line. In this case, we want a vertical line to go from the top to the bottom. Now, this particular line in the default document, I think might be a little bit too light for this particular application. So if you really want, you can get creative. Option click the custom line tool, and went to the wrong screen, but we can add our own thicker line, which is really easy to do. Just click create. Solid line is exactly what we want. The only thing we're changing is the line thickness here. And so I'm going to call this 0.025, and we're going to get a slightly thicker line. And then when we use this line, do the same thing, shift, we'll get a nice thick line there for display. And we can futz with that as we need to. We'll do these here. On the tenor line. And on the bass line. All right, so that's kind of how you do it. This is the other way I've seen this done, where you have the line connecting the ranges, and that's pretty much all there is to it. Now, there's a couple of variations I've seen of this Ambitus. You can see that I have the quarter note heads stacked on top of each other. I've done this obviously by making this a 1/4 measure. I've also seen it where they're offset from each other, so there's a quarter note here and then there's a quarter note here. You can do that as well. The only difference is that instead of a 1/4 measure, you make this a 2/4 measure, and instead of putting the notes on top of each other, you just put them sequentially. So you have the first quarter note and the second quarter note, the low note, and then the high note. And then if you want the line, instead of creating a completely vertical line, obviously you can just create a diagonal line to connect the ranges that way. So that's an alternative way of doing the Ambitus with two notes diagonally separated like that. I've even seen it where these are actually whole note heads in that manner. You can do the same thing. Instead of a 2/4 measure, you can actually make it an 8/4 measure, or a 2/1 measure, or a 4/2 measure, I suppose, however you want to do it, to get two whole notes that go next to each other, or a 4/4 measure if you want whole notes stacked on top of each other. You get the idea of the different kinds of variations that you can do here. So let's start talking about the incipit version of this, which is slightly different, where there's sort of a break. Like, this is a separate measure set off to the left, and then the bracket goes here and everything. This is done slightly differently. So let's go over to this other file I have and talk about this a little bit. And I've sort of started this the same way, and you can kind of see what's going on. Instead of a 1/4 measure here, you can obviously see that I've done a 2/4 measure. You'll notice a couple of other differences. I'm showing the clef here, which is what you're going to want to do for this particular thing. And in the staff style, I've made just a couple different changes. So this is an incipit bar staff style instead of the Ambitus bar. You can see that I'm still hiding the key signature. I'm still hiding the time signature. Incidentally, you can do this showing the key signature as well. So if that's a variation that you want to see, you can do that as well. Also hiding the display rest and empty measures, not showing stems. But you can see that I have clefs are still showing in this particular staff style. One extra thing that you can or cannot do, and I'm going to do it here, is that you can choose to not show the staff names to the left here, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm actually going to uncheck staff names in this staff style as well. And when I click OK, it will update that to not show the staff names. And I will get those back in a second. I'll show you how to do that. All right, so it starts the same, but now we're going to get into where this gets a little bit different, right? Actually, one thing I realized I forgot to do in the measure attributes for this first measure, I did already include in measure numbering. We also want to have an invisible bar line here, so we'll just get rid of that bar line. And as I said, this is where it starts to get different. And what we want to do is separate these two. Essentially what's going to happen is I'm going to make these two different systems. And there's a way to do this manually, but there's a way easier way to do this with a nice little plugin. In the plugin menu, under the measure section, create coda system. Now, this is not what this coda system was really designed for, but we can use it in this way, and it's really, really handy. So what I'm going to do is, I don't want the coda symbols, I don't want the coda text, I don't want this, I want this to be none. So I'm just sort of unchecking everything here. I'm also going to add a little bit more horizontal space than what it's allowing me here. And actually we can adjust this later. So for now, I'm just going to change the horizontal space before coda to 1 inch. And when I click OK, you're going to see what happens is that they now separate apart, right? And they're perfectly in line. This is how this the coda system plugin works. I believe I covered this plugin at some point. I'll have to find that and link the video here as well. Now, one thing this coda system does is it adds a staff style here to the what's now a second system, and we actually don't want these. So you can go ahead and click these or remove the staff style if you need to. This is just hiding the staff names, which we don't want to do. I'm going to show you what's going on here in a second. And let's see, in the measure attributes for the first bar, I already did this. We're hiding the bar line, but you'll notice that the bar line came back. There's now a double bar line. This is actually part of that coda system. It's going ahead and creating this bar line for us. So we can just go in here and edit this. Instead of double, we want to choose invisible again and click OK. And that gets rid of the bar line. The other thing that we want to do here, I should have done this while I'm here, is we want to hide cautionary clefs, key, and time signatures in this bar so that that all goes away. And already we're getting a lot closer to what we need. While I'm in the measure tool, I'm going to go into this second bar, or the pickup bar, and I'm going to do something different here, which is going to allow us to show the full staff and group names. And there's an option under the behavior section here, show full staff and group names for this measure. And when you click that, just for this measure, it's going to show the full and staff names, and we click OK, and it will do just that. So that's how we managed to get that the full names over here. Now we're going to have to do a couple of other things. What we also don't want is we don't want the left bar line here, we don't want the bracket, and we don't want the piano part here. So let's just do a few things here. The first thing, go back into the measure attributes. I could have done this all at once actually. Under the left bar line, just choose invisible, and you're good to go. We still have the bracket, which I'll deal with in a second, and we still have this. Now for this situation here with the piano part, we don't need to see this. So I'm actually going to use another staff style here. Actually, it doesn't matter. I could delete this one. It doesn't quite matter because this staff style is going to override that anyway. Select these two bars, and I'm going to choose the force hide staff and cutaway. And you'll see exactly what happens is that everything in those two measures just completely disappears. And so now we're just left with these measures. So we're getting a lot closer. The only thing we have to deal with is this bracket, which we don't necessarily want. And if you remember from the lessons about brackets, what's interesting about these brackets is that they can be controlled in terms of what measures they start in. So if I just double click that bracket, you're going to see that the group attribute for this is applying to all measures, which is what it usually does. But what we can do is actually switch it over to measures 1 through 18, but instead we're just going to switch it to 2 through 18. And what will happen is that the bracket will now start in what Finale considers the second measure, which is this measure, so it will not appear in this measure. All right, so now you can see that we've basically got our incipit bar ahead of the music. Now we can do a little bit of work spacing these around because obviously this is a little bit squished. This could go over to the left. And in order to do this in this method, the best thing to do is actually use the page layout tool here so you can kind of see what's going on. There's actually a system to the left here and a system to the right. And normally this is not allowed to happen in Finale, but when the Coda System plugin operates, what it does is it unchecks this option here called Avoid Margin Collisions. This is actually what's allowing these systems to be laid out side by side like this. With that check, you wouldn't be able to do this. They would this one would be up top and this one would be on the bottom. And no matter how skinny they are, you couldn't overlap them. So you have to have Avoid Margin Collisions turned off in order to do that. So now what we can do is we can make all kinds of changes here. And with this Avoid Margin Collisions turned off, you do have to be careful because you can get kind of squirrely with how these go. You can go way outside the page margins and everything. So just be careful when you're dragging these around. And in this case, I'm just going to hold down Shift and go to the left so that I know I'm only going horizontally, and I can go all the way up to the edge of the page margin there to get it all the way to the left. We can also do some other things here. If we want to make this a little bit skinnier, we can choose the one down here to make this a little bit shorter to get something like that. And this is all just fine tuning here. Another thing I can do with this is I can actually go into the measure tool here, click that bottom one and move that those notes a little bit to the right so it kind of spreads out a little bit more. Again, just fine tuning. Maybe we'll make it even slightly skinnier. And then with this second system here, what we can do is actually just drag this handle over to the left to get it a lot closer. So you can have something like that. So that's one way to do this incipit. Another thing, if you really want to, you can get a little bit fancier with this. We can even move this over further. Now the staff names are going to overlap, but you can always move those staff names. In fact, you can just use the selection tool to do that. Just kind of drag that up there, drag the alto up there, showing a little ghost staff name on the left there, but that's okay. It doesn't actually appear. drag tenor there, and drag bass to there. So we're kind of all lined up. So that would be another version of doing that. So there you go. So that's the incipit. You know, of course, you can always do a little bit more work with the lines if you really want to. I'm just getting a little bit OCD here with these, but you get the idea how you can adjust these so that they look good. Just to finish this off. And there you go. So that's the incipit version of doing these vocal ranges. And so there you go. And of course, again, you know, if you don't want to show the closed note heads, you could do this instead of a 2/4 bar as an 8/4 bar, and put two whole notes next to each other. There's also other things you can do, like you can show, if you're doing like old Renaissance music and you want to show the old clef here and also show the old starting note and all that kind of stuff, you can get kind of fancy with all this stuff. Again, if you want to show the key signature here, you can. If you're not showing the key signature, I don't have any situation here, and one of these notes happens to be a sharp or a flat, you may want to intentionally show the sharp. So if the tenor line had gone to F sharp instead of G, you might want to put the sharp in front of the F here. You know, that's obviously easy to do with either simple or speedy entry. So anyway, so that's how you do these incipit bars and the Ambitus bars. A couple different ways to do it. There's many variations. You can kind of choose whichever one you want. And so yeah, so there you go. Hopefully this has helped. Thanks, Kevin, for the suggestion. This was a great one. This is a fun one to do, and I'm sure this will help a lot of people. And incidentally, just to wrap this up, you don't need to do this for vocal music. This can obviously be used for any instrumental music. If you have you know, middle school band or something and you want to show the ranges, you can do this for them as well. So this isn't totally limited to vocal music, obviously. And so there you go, Ambitus and Incipits in Finale. And so yeah, so thanks for watching. Once again, don't forget to subscribe. And if you have your own requests, don't forget to send me an email, and maybe I'll look at your request as well and do a video for you. So once again, thanks, Kevin. Thanks, everyone, for watching. My name is Jason, and I will see you soon on the next video.